Hey everyone, Warwick's here. With BfA ending and everyone's eyes looking towards Shadowlands, I wanted to take a step back and look at the journey that each class had in BfA. Today, we're going to be looking at Warriors. If this is your first retrospective video, I'm going to recommend that you check out the Monk video for how we grade the specs in this series. A link to that video is in the upper right hand corner of the screen right about now-ish. Before we go charging into the Warrior specs, I just wanted to give a shout out to my guild member and fellow officer at barely above average on Ice Crown NA, Pads. He has stepped up to help me record footage, so you get high-level gameplay with Warrior time-walking dungeons, and Warrior was his main this expansion. Let's leap into Warriors. We'll start normally like we do with tank classes with the tank spec, and that's Protection Warrior. Prot Warrior started out this expansion next to Guardian Druid with the perception of the worst spec in the game for tanking. No one really played it at a high level. In 8.1, they got some changes, with the biggest one being Ignore Pain removed from the global cooldown. This increased their mitigation uptime in a big way, which was a huge shift for the spec as a whole. In Season 2 of Mythic Plus with the Reaping Affix, they became monsters. Not only did they take little damage, Prot Warriors also ended many keys as the top damage dealer, even above DPS specs. Thunderclap spam became the norm, and the damage was pretty overtuned. Some targeted tweaks happened, and that dominance ended, but they still dominated Mythic Plus overall as the #1 tank for key pushing. They were the tank of choice in Seasons 2 through 4 for both tank pushing and MDI. While Brewmasters tried in later seasons and Blood was the king in Season 1, Prot Warrior overtook Blood and never relinquished the throne. They held it with an iron fist. Grade, S tier. In Raid, they never found a place above the middle of the pack. While the changes they received in 8.1 helped them immensely as a small group tank, they never found a place in high-level Raid. In certain Raid tiers, the spec suffered due to high magic damage output, like Battle for Gazara Lore or Nyalotha. Spell Reflect can only do so much when it has a cooldown. They kind of fell right next to Prot Paladin in that they were average but serviceable. I think they were better than they were given credit for, but when you compete in the shadows of Brewmaster Monks, it takes a lot to look like an actual good tank. Brewmaster was just that powerful this season. Rather, this expansion. Grade is a B. The overall grade is an A. Prot has some hurtful changes that damage it as a Mythic Plus tank coming in Shadowlands. Blizzard has effectively killed the Thunderclap spam builds, and most high-level Warrior tanks and tank mains are pretty unhappy with these changes. Hopefully more iteration on the spec begins to happen throughout the rest of the beta, though some of the more recent changes seem like they are starting to go in the right direction, but have a lot more left to go and a lot left to desire. We're going to move on to Arms Warrior. Arms Warrior started off this expansion impressing everyone with its synchronized cooldown windows and excellent talent choice options that modified their gameplay. In practice, it led to an up and down expansion. In Mythic Plus, Arms in theory should excel here. They have massive burst AoE with Warbreaker, Sweeping Strikes, into Bladestorm combination. What held them back were generally two factors. One, they had very little self-sustain, which became an issue the higher the keys got. Victory Rush wasn't enough, and Impending Victory competed with a single target stun in Stormbolt and a mobility tool in Double Charge, which were both generally seen as more valued by the player base. And number two, Prot Warrior existed. It kind of overshadowed the class as a whole in Mythic Plus. I think Arms was a bit underrated, and a good Arms Warrior can absolutely pump damage, especially in 8.3 with the right set of corruptions in their hands. Grade, A. In Raid, it was a bit of a roller coaster. In Uldir, they were highly sought after as a spec due to the Massacre talent, and a certain phase of Gahoon that let that talent shine, where he took massive amounts of damage below 30% below. Executes were heavily favored at that time. In Battle for Gazara Lore and Eternal Palace, they fell off a cliff. I think they got no fewer than 3 to 4 static 5% damage buffs across the board. Their damage was so poor. In 8.3, with the advent of corruptions, Arms found Expedient and Gushing Woods to be very good for the spec. This made Arms have as much action per minute as Fury because of the Expedient corruption. Arms shot to the top of the melee rankings, and I say melee because no one catches Fire Mage. Arms started and ended in a very good place performance and perception-wise for Raid teams, so the grade here is still going to be pretty good, A-. Overall grade, A-. The Raid weight's a little bit heavier here since the Raid perception in the middle of the expansion did impact the community's perception of the spec, even going into 8.3 when people realized that it was actually still even pretty good. It's in a pretty good spot, Arms is, as we head into Shadowlands. There are some things that need to be looked at, but the tweaks seem and feel small to make the specs function slightly better. The unpruning did nothing for them though, as far as I can tell, so that needs to be something that may or may not be as successful for them. And finally, Fury Warrior. Fury Warrior was one of the DPS specs that I felt played the smoothest throughout this expansion. No matter what your gear level, the spec felt fun to play, which is not true of all DPS specs. They feel like they need a certain haste or a certain mastery to start to feel right. Looking at you, Arms Warrior. In Mythic Plus, Fury was an outstanding spec, if you pulled small. Due to the target cap placed on the spec with Whirlwind, it had a ceiling on how much success it was going to have versus an uncapped spec like the Unholy Death Knight, for example. This put it much in the same book as Marksmanship Hunter, only slightly better because of other utility. It had multiple slows like Dragon's Roar and Piercing Howl. It brought Battle Shout and Rallying Cry as powerful buffs. If the spec was uncapped, I think it becomes pretty dominant in DPS for Mythic Plus. The target cap just put a burden on the spec that really didn't feel needed in my view. Grade is a B. In Raid, that target cap felt less impactful, and Fury found quite the success in the middle part of the expansion. In 8.0, it was outclassed by Arms, who found better execute windows, but in Desire Lore and Eternal Palace, Fury was the spec of choice for warriors, as it brought good self-sustain, great mobility, no ramp-up time in its damage, meaning you were getting out of the gates hot and right from the get-go. This gave Fury a good place in any group, as it was generally expected to have one warrior for Battle Shout, and your tanks were not warriors. Overall, I think Fury did well this entire expansion. He got outshined by Arms in 8.0 and 8.3 due to fight design and external system design issues that didn't really Fury had no control over. Grade is an A. Overall grade here is a B+. With most classes getting a target cap, I think this helps Fury the most actually. They'll be able to excel at cutting edge keys more often than they did in BfA. In Raid, I think they'll continue along the same path of being a very solid choice for any Raid team, though they may experience similar issues this expansion where Arms is just outright better due to numbers tuning or external system issues. Anyways, that's my grades for Warriors this expansion. If you choose to play a Warrior going into Shadowlands and you are a DPS player, I think you're going to have a fun choice to make between Arms and Fury. If you like the tank or a Protection Warrior main, you're going to have some things to seriously consider if you want to move forward with the spec. Overall, Warriors are a class that can still sneak in as my fourth character if the Marksman Hunter changes don't really work and or Survival doesn't get more iteration. So how did you grade Warriors this expansion? Leave a comment below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It would mean a lot to me. Next up, we're going to do mages. Until then everyone, stay safe, wear your mask, and I will see you next time.